Thank you so much. I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about the importance of sharing the data that results from federally funded biomedical research studies, particularly those from the National Institutes of Health, or NIH, which is part of the Department of Health and Human Services, and I work at NIH. And your taxpayer dollars go to the research that we fund. So the money that we get from Congress goes largely out into the world to research institutions in the US and abroad. In this first slide, I recognize that this is pretty wordy, but the point of this slide and the point of these bolded figures is not to memorize them or anything like that, but to get the idea of how bad data sharing and data accessibility as a result of those federally funded research studies and publications is currently. And so these are some recent studies and one preprint, which is a pre-publication study, just showing researchers who tried to get access to data from studies that are published and how hard of a time they had. So you can see the figures in the lower lines of each of the middle cells. 3.3% of publications, 26.9% of authors of those original studies provided the data underlying their studies. This is pretty bad. Now, why does this matter? Why should we care? Why should you care? Why does NIH want the data resulting from its funded research to be shared? Well, number one, it advances rigorous and reproducible research. It enables the validation of research results. So if a paper is published, sharing the data underlying it can help other researchers go in and make sure that those findings and that those statistics were accurate. And that helps with trust. It makes high-value data sets accessible. So when data are shared, they're not only there for validation of that original study, but they can be mined for future research questions, many more than the original study team probably would be able to do. And so those data sets gain in value as more researchers are able to access them and ask new questions of them. And that in itself can accelerate future research directions. It increases opportunity for citation. Everyone in science wants people to cite their work and their papers. And it increases collaboration. So interdisciplinary researchers can come together and know what each other's doing and work together to make new discoveries. Importantly, it promotes public trust in research, transparency and accountability. Where did my taxpayer dollars go? What came of them? What are the data resulting from them? How are they being used? And although not all biomedical research that NIH funds has human participants, a lot of it is basic research or bench or lab research. Many do have human participants in clinical trials and other studies, and this maximizes those contributions. People dedicate their time. Many of them have particular diseases or conditions that they're very interested in finding cures for, and enabling sharing maximizes those contributions. And of course, we appropriately protect those data as they're shared. And here, this is just to show you how important trust is. In this study, across these 4 factors, what mattered the most to the people being asked in the study about what would make them trust scientific research findings. And the most important factor of the 4 listed here is when data are openly available to the public. So trust matters. What did NIH do about this? How are we making this better? We put out a policy, as we do, that applies to the researchers and the institutions that we fund and their work. And this arrow shows you how we got there. It's not an easy process. Going way back to 2016, we put out our first RFI, which stands for Request for Information. And that's when we put something out to the world and we ask the public, tell us what you think about this. And we hear from professional societies, from other researchers, from institutions, from all kinds of interested parties, from the public. And this first one was on strategies on data management, sharing, and citation. 2 years later, we put out another RFI on the proposed provisions for a draft policy. So this is what would even go in a policy. Here are some ideas. Tell us what you think of them. In 2019, we went out with our actual draft policy and related guidance for comment as well. And in 2020, we released our final policy. And then nearly 3 years later, the policy went out in the fall of 2020. And at the beginning of 2023, the policy was effective. And that allowed nearly 3 years for people to get used to this policy, to adapt their systems, to learn about what they needed to do. And this was all very deliberate. And up here in the left-hand side, you can see we also underwent tribal consultation and got input from the Secretary's Advisory Committee for Human Research Protections, which is an agency also, or a committee also under Health and Human Services. And at the bottom here in red, this has to do with a White House memo that I'm not going to get into. Now, what is required under the data management and sharing policy? It requires two things: submission of a data management and sharing plan, which outlines how, where, and when you're going to share your data, and researchers propose this to us. And we emphasize through this sharing through established repositories. So if a researcher says, hey, I'm going to share the data on my personal website, don't worry, it'll be fine, it'll be there forever, we're going to say, hey, that's probably not good enough, let's rethink that. And these plans are assessed by staff at NIH. And the second requirement is compliance with the plan, just doing what you said you would do. And ICO here means institute, center, or office. NIH is made up of 27 institutes and centers. So we have a lot going on. And if you don't comply with your plan, that could affect your future funding. And again, this policy was effective in January of 2023 and replaced an older data sharing policy that was not as comprehensive and only applied to very large awards, over 500,000 a year. We put out a lot of materials to help them understand the policy. These are all guidance documents, or referred to as supplemental information. Elements: what should go in a data management and sharing plan? Allowable costs: what kind of costs can researchers request when they're undergoing this, for all sorts of things like researchers or their staff who are going to actually help manage and share the data, repository fees that they're going to put into. Selecting a repository for data resulting from the research. So this is, what are some characteristics of a good repository, in helping me choose if that choice isn't already made for me through other means. And the White House itself put out a complimentary version of this guidance. Protecting privacy when sharing human research participant data, and also responsible management and sharing of American Indian and Alaska Native participant data. And we have lots of FAQs, which are frequently asked questions to help people understand the policy. And our newest FAQs are on our small business awards called SBIRs and STTRs. And finally, we have a number of data management and sharing plans that are samples, so people can look online and see, well, what does a good sample plan look like? What should I be thinking about when I'm putting this together? And we have room to practice a generous philosophy. We're all learning together. We might be not in an ideal phase quite yet, but we're going to get there. We're going to identify best practices, and we want to learn what's challenging for people. And in the end, we also hope to know more about how the data are shared and used. Thank you very much.